going to go over volume spacers and how to hack a Fox volume spacer to fit in your XFusion O2 Pro R rear shock. But first, let's talk about the basics.
Are these what volume spacers are? I thought they were toys. And what does Da Vinci's coffee jar have to do with this?
Yes, these are volume spacers, also known as tokens. The green one is for Fox 34 forks and it says it on the bottom, 34. And the orange ones are for Fox 36. It also says it on the bottom. Now these ones are for Fox rear shocks, DPS and DPX2 models. They come in a kit. The purpose of volume spacers is to tune your suspension to your weight and riding style. In other words, heavier or more aggressive riders will need more volume spacers.
Feline coming! Oh!
If you visit the Fox website, you will find shock, force, versus shock travel chart.
It illustrates curves for 3 different scenarios: no spacer, medium spacer, and large spacer. You can find it in the link in the description below.
This is an air spring chart from the Fox website. I'll explain what this means. Bottom left is full extension and top right is full compression or bottom out. For example, if you take a job that generates 7 units of force, your shock will compress differently depending on your volume spacer size. In the case of no volume spacer, the yellow line, your shock will fully compress and bottom out. This can cause damage to the internal parts of the shock and the frame of the bike. In the case of using a medium spacer, orange line, your shock will compress 16.5 units of travel out of 19. This means that the spacer kept you from bottoming out and perhaps saved you from crashing. In the case of using a large spacer, red line, your shock will compress 14.5 units of travel out of 19. This means you are farther from bottoming out and your bike can handle bigger drops or jumps. If you add more air, blue line, instead of tuning with spacers, what you end up doing is shifting the compression curve up. This means that your shock will be stiff in all riding conditions and make your bike really rough to ride.
So how do volume spacers work?
First of all, these are for air suspension shocks, also known as air spring shocks, which depends on the air in their chamber. Now let's talk about the ideal gas law so you may understand how air suspension works.
The ideal gas law is PV equals nRT, where P is pressure, V is volume, N is the number of moles of gas, R is gas constant, and T is temperature. Now let's solve for pressure. Assuming that the temperature does not change in our experiment and R is constant, we'll equate them to 1. Since we cannot measure the number of air molecules, N is going to be the number of times we pump to fill the shock to 50 psi and keep N constant in all 3 scenarios. Therefore, the ideal gas law becomes pressure equals N divided by volume, which means pressure and volume are inversely proportional. Less volume equals higher pressure equals less travel, which equates to not bottoming out. And this is what volume spacers do. They reduce the volume so that you can tune your shocks.
This is where Da Vinci's coffee jar comes in. We will use it to illustrate how an air shock moves. The glass jar is the air chamber and the handle is the air spring shaft. What happens on your bike when you're riding is it's fully extended and then when you hit a drop, it compresses. This is known as shock absorption. When fully compressed, this much air volume was compressed to this much air volume. Therefore, low volume equals high pressure. These are very easy to install on your shocks. You simply open the chamber, snap it on, air it up, and then tackle the most aggressive obstacle in your skill level. If you bottom out, you can just add another spacer. They simply snap on. Not really. And then test it, and if you need another one, you just snap another one on there and go test it again and repeat the process.
For the rear shock, you can't just keep adding spacers. You have to replace them with a larger one. And if you bottom out with a small one, then replace it with a large one. And if you keep bottoming out, then you keep replacing it until you get to the right one for you.
Now we will go outside to test no spacer, small spacer, and large spacer. We will use 50 psi as our base pressure and do a simple drop on the straight curve.
Come on, let's go! And now my brother's gonna test 3 scenarios on this drop.
Yeah, I'm just gonna calm down, let the bike drop, and see how much it travels.
And we're gonna measure it with this caliper. Test 1, no spacers. Test 2, small spacer. Test 3, large spacer.
As you can see, a larger spacer makes it harder for the shock to compress. That's why you need spacers, to keep you from adding more air so that your shock doesn't get stiff. This is known as a progressive shock, which means the more it travels, the more force it needs to continue to travel. Now I'm going to use the jar to show you how it works.
We are using this jar because it's transparent. We add a red volume spacer and we can see that the volume for air compression is reduced. If we need to adjust after testing, we open our shock chamber and add a second spacer. In this case, the black spacer. As you can see, the compression volume is further reduced, making your shock more progressive.
So now you can hit harder drops and higher jumps.
But wait, aren't these for Fox shocks? You have an XFusion.
That's right, XFusion does not make spacers for their shock. That's why we will show you how to modify them to fit in your XFusion O2 Pro R rear shock.
So if you like this video and you love the hack, make sure you like, subscribe, share, and click that notification button. It'll keep you from bottoming out. And remember, send it upwards! Thanks to Natalia for providing her aggressive riding video. Today's bloopers!
Today we are going to talk about volumes. Okay, restart it, because I thought I said
Shock, force, and shock. No, wait.
also known as air spring shocks. And oh my gosh. I was about to say, you can also find them in the link
With
below.
the rear spacers. Wait. Why do I keep saying shock? With the rear spacers.
Oh, I thought you weren't recording. Hold on, start it again.